We are live. This is the Modern Job Hunt. It's a show basically highlighting the challenges of finding a role in the modern tech space. Right now, we're experiencing, it's 2023, a lot of challenges with tech layoffs, downturn in the economy. So this series is all about how to find a role, tips and tricks from myself and friends, experts, colleagues. So this episode is specifically about how to find your ideal workspace. I'm Ryan Fetterly. I have with me Luis Espinal, who's a former colleague of mine, and we'll be chatting about all the kind of evaluating your employer piece, which is critical to finding your next job. With that, I'll hand it over to Luis to provide a bit more of a deeper introduction about himself.
That's great. What I can tell you is I'm an avid learner. I'm an avid learner all the time. I think it will be my trait for my ongoing rest of my life. It has been so far. I'm a active product manager, active in the product community as well, in Vancouver, and also connecting with other communities around the globe through Facebook groups and through other groups. So I can help out like new product managers and also be helped by people who are more senior and experienced than myself. That's pretty much what I can tell you. I've been in different type of tech industries. I've been in warehouse management. I've been in e-commerce, currently in fintech. Also, I've been in education learning. Again, I've been in different verticals as well. I have my favorites and I have my least favorites that I might not come back to, but that's a story for a different day.
Sounds good. Yeah. As this is an episode number 3 of the series, and I am a product manager, I've been taking feedback from my listeners about how I can improve this show. I have tried to improve the audio on this. So I'm trying a new audio setup. That's one of the main changes. I'm also going to try to make sure that folks can understand who is here. So you can see here, I've just shared a QR code about Luis. So if anyone's listening in, that's Luis's LinkedIn. You can learn more about him, his history, his work right now. So we're going to try some cool new things on this episode, and that's all about kind of learning how these live streaming products work. You can also ask questions. I posted ahead that if you have any questions, just ping him on LinkedIn. We're going to try to weave some of those questions in, some of the live questions too. So this show is part of me learning all about all these tools as a product person. Maybe one day I'll just be doing some product marketing and share it. So yeah, with that kind of introduction, folks can follow us along on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, and kind of ask questions along the way. So I'll get us started just by asking kind of an overall question to Luis. What is the hardest part about finding a job?
Hardest part about finding a job is actually like making sure that you're looking in the right places. So there's jobs that are created for people. There's jobs that are posted because they want to fulfill a job for somebody who left the company. There's jobs that are created for a specific reason in a company, and there's other jobs that are not even posted. They're generated because like from word of mouth, like from one person to another person. So those are that's the hardest part for myself to finding a job. Also, if you're unemployed, your active role is to find a job first, like find a source of income, like not really a job, source of income in general. Then if you're at a company and if you're at a position that you're looking to move out of, the uncertainty of moving, like that's the hardest piece of moving as well. Like the moving from one team to another internal, or moving from one company to another company generates uncertainty, generates anxiety, and that's another hard part of finding a job. So it's not easy and it's stressful. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think that a few years ago, when the economy was going crazy, and the cash was super cheap, with companies like
Mhm.
Tiger Capital throwing it around, tech jobs were seeing 20, 30, 40, 50% raises. So I think people were okay with a lot of that uncertainty shifting from one company to another. And that's
Mhm.
like right now, where companies are constantly doing layoffs. That shift is even bigger, which is why we're here today. And this episode kind of spun out of a side chat that Lewis and I were having about like the challenges that I was having around evaluating new employers, and his history having worked at, and this isn't our first rodeo. We've been around for 10 plus years in the game. So we've transitioned to different companies. And so that's really what we're talking about today. It's kind of evaluating that next employer. How do you de-risk that for yourself as a job hunter?
Mhm.
Um, and it can be like extremely stressful, and we'll talk about that, how when you're in an interview, do you really want to ask all the hard questions about like what their cash flow situation's like, whether they're VC backed or kind of bootstrapped, and like how they're paying your own salary? Like these are hard questions to ask. So yeah, with kind of that great kind of intro, I'd say, like, what is the riskiest thing about transitioning, to a new company in your opinion?
The riskiest thing is actually like that, as a candidate don't show all the cards, they're also the employers not showing all the cards. So the riskiest thing is coming into a conversation like it. Keep in mind like the hiring position is, I find it similar to speed dating, right? Like so you're you're knowing but not really 100% knowing the manager that will be your manager. You're knowing but not 100% knowing the person that will be fulfilling the position at the company. So that's the riskiest part, is to understand whether this manager would be a good career coach for myself moving forward, or whether this manager would only be like a manager for the position, and we will only talk about projects and how are we doing in terms of performance, but not really what is my next move in the company, or what am I going to do afterwards, what am I learning, what am I not learning. So that the hardest piece is actually, it's the would this manager become a source of learning and will be that career coach that will take my career further, or would this manager be somebody who will, I would just show up for work, which is like sometimes a person would only want to do a job and want to do a job pretty well. That's totally fine. On my learning, my constant learning also like forced me to actually get that evaluate that employer whether they're going to be a really good career coach. I think that's the risk of the unknown that can be the hardest to understand during an interview process.
Yeah,
I
and
can tell
I
you actually I can tell you a really good story about that. I was hiring for a position at a company. I'm not gonna say the sinner here. A position at a company where part of the hiring process, it raised a red flag for myself, which where the manager said like a phrase that I still hold in my head: when there's no data, my word is the word that counts. And that was an immediate red flag for myself, which means that I will have to justify all my work. I have to justify everything. If not, I'm fighting against an authoritarian manager who would say, "What I tell you is the thing that you're going to be working on." That it immediate raises a red flag for myself. So that is how interviewing process works. I had like that is a red flag, a green flag opposite to that. I was hiring for a position where the manager said, "Hey, do you think the role that you're applying for is? Do you think this is the right way to name the role, or do you think it would be a different? Like, do you think if we add a technical level, do you think if we add a senior level, or do you think if we only add it like as a generalist, do you think it would be a better fit for yourself, or do you think it would be like a different way? What is your experience on this?" So that conversation puts me in a position where I'm like not only being evaluated, but also I'm helping the company at the time that I'm being hired for this position. So that is how I evaluate like two different green flag and red flags when hiring.
Totally. And
Mhm.
I think that one thing that I've found over my career, companies have a more standardized interview process. So you actually know about the company as opposed to the people. And when I've interviewed for smaller companies, sometimes one interview goes amazingly, and you're like, "Wow, this company is rock stars." And then the next interview, it's like totally random, and you're like, "That was a weird experience." And really, I think that's the reality of kind of evaluating employers is that when you look at Amazon's bar raiser program and something like they actively train people how to interview, and the best companies out there train and standardize their processes so that you will get a smooth experience candidate to candidate. Whereas the smaller companies, it is really like a total mixed bag. And sometimes that one manager might be amazing because they have free reign. Other times it might not be the case. And so like that's where like I find when I'm going for scale ups, you're really evaluating like the person more than the company. When it's a large company, you're evaluating the company over the person because the flexibility of that manager's decisions at a large Fortune 500 company is going to be pretty minimal. You know, they're going to follow rubrics and certain things while you're in your role.
We'll have to add to that as well because you mentioned Amazon, and I know I worked in big companies before, like people looking at this can see their LinkedIn. I work at big companies before, and one thing that I've noticed is like it depends. It also depends which team are you be working on. Will you be working on the big company? Because if a company is over, like if it's a public company with over 2,000 employees, like I would say like 5K employees and over, then what happens is that the company has guidelines and the companies have their own like high level culture, high level values and everything, but also each team starts to have their own culture. Each team will have their own culture, which means that you have to evaluate who's hiring for you as well. Like I remember looking like talking to people at a company like that was a big company, talking to people and having a mixed feelings of it, like certain person telling me, hey, you know what, if you're going to work on that company, make sure that your schedule is on point, like you can log off and you won't be working 24/7. But then at the same company, some other person will tell me, this is an amazing company, you definitely have to sign with them. Like it doesn't matter, like you will get an experience that you have no idea. And so those mixed feelings comes from like big companies tend to have like smaller cultures within the squads, within the pods, within the teams, right? So that's also something to be wary about when evaluating big companies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. And um, when you think of changing roles, like where does job hopping and your experience fit
Yeah.
into evaluating companies? Because it like having done more roles, I feel like I have a better understanding of what culture I'm looking for. But yet it still seems like if you've done a few roles in a few years, you're explaining your journey to
Mhm.
recruiters. So where do you sit on kind of like how job hunting helps or hinders your ability to evaluate new employers?
So a few things when job hopping. Let's talk about job hopping overall. One, job hopping doesn't mean working like going from one company to another within a span of 3 months, 4 months. Like that's not really that's the mainstream type of like bad job hopping like everybody sells on social media. It's not that. It's actually you can job hop within the same company. For example, you can evaluate a different role, like meaning you're at the point that you already learned enough. Now you're providing more value than what you're getting out of the role that you have right now, which means that you want to learn something different. Like maybe you want to change into finance and look what the finance role has to do with like accounting. Do you want to change to accounting? Let's start tech, for example. A person can go from being a product manager to being a product designer, or being a product manager to being a developer. Maybe you want to learn more on your technical skills and go to a different role. That's job hopping, and it has to do more with the learning than with getting more pay. Also, job hopping, like people tend to think as if it was I don't know, like 5 years ago, where like you can job hop like every 4 months, people will hire you no matter what. 4 months, people will hire you no matter what, and then you have a bunch of 4 months in companies that it's for me it's a bit embarrassing. Like I'm not gonna judge. Just to say, like I'm not gonna judge if you have it in your resume. It does raises red flags when hiring. Like when I'm hiring as well, it does raises red flags. Um, then it also goes into a conversation. Then let me come back to what I was saying is like normally you job hop from one role to another, but you also can job hop like after a year of being at a company, 2 years of being at a company and say, no, you know what, I'm ready for my next learning. And I'm not getting that learning here on this vertical, for example. And then you want to move to another vertical and you want to learn more about it. Like like those things, one gets you out of your comfort zone, and the other one is gets you into a zone where like you're constantly learning. So then when doing the job hopping, when talking to recruiters, for example, talking to your potential next employer, um, on evaluating the culture of the company as well, yeah, definitely want to like what am I gaining and what am I letting go of the previous company or the previous role as well. So, for example, I could tell you like one thing that I normally talk with recruiters is, hey, you know what, my family is first. Like I have kids. My family, I put my family first on top of everything. If you're okay with it, we continue the conversation. Like that's one thing, like non-negotiable of myself. The company needs to be aware that my family comes first, which means I already ruled out three big names of companies that are out there in tech that might not think that way. They normally expect you to answer your cell phone at 3 o'clock in the morning if something goes on. That might not be my fit. But other companies as like support that. Other companies are okay with that, which means that like I do fit those companies. Um, so that's one of the non-negotiables that I do have. So yeah, that's pretty much. I'm flexible. The other thing is that some others that I'm flexible enough, right? I said the company, they say, oh, you know what, we're hybrid. Okay, what type of hybrid do you have? Because if it's a hybrid of like 4 days in the office but one day at home, or like we 100% want people at the office. Okay, if it's nearby, I'm flexible. If it's like 2 hours from where I live, I might not be flexible enough. Like go and evaluate that against my first principle, whether my family wants to move or not. If my family wants to move, if family is flexible to move, I'm okay. If my family is not flexible to move, definitely move on to from that role to another. So yeah, I also want to mention that job hopping might not be for everyone because you put yourself in an uncomfortable position of learning a new like learning all the time and making sure that you fit a new company culture and the team culture as well. And to bring your full self at it, sometimes you will job hop to the wrong position, and which means that you will have to almost immediately job hop and like assume that that never happened in your especially in your resume, assume that that never happened. So that's one thing, and the other one is like when you're unemployed and you're actually looking for that source of income, and you like your first your first job offer that comes in, if you have no other in the pipeline, that's the one that you're going to take. So and then you'll figure out if there's another role opening, or if there's something else happening in the market that can change that in the near future as well. So yeah.
Yeah, I think some of the key pieces there was that with changing roles, you are also learning about yourself. And that was something that I was thinking about while preparing for this episode is that, like, if you hadn't talked to friends that worked for certain tech companies, you may not know that those tech companies have a different value system as you. You may not, if you've never tried hybrid, where you're in the office on Tuesday, someone is at home on Tuesday, and you're still on a Zoom call, then you may think, "Oh, hybrid's great. I get to see people all the time." In reality, you see people 1/10 the time because you're always on conflicting schedules. So, like, I think that the benefits of changing jobs is that you do develop your own personal preferences. And I think that with global work, this whole evaluating your ideal place to work is becoming increasingly important. Like now, if you're remote, and you're logging into a different Google Suite, a different Slack with a different computer, like when you're changing jobs, the real piece that is like a challenge is like the culture. And unfortunately, I find that the jobs platforms out there are not really suitable for this piece. And I think that's two factors. One, companies are still trying to figure out who they are, like in this whole remote global world, because I think that if a company understood, oh, this is exactly who we are, like 50% in office and our culture is this and our like that, then they could easily position that. But the problem is, like you said, there's microcultures and all kinds of things, so it is very difficult. Like, even job postings, you often read a job posting, you're like, I have no clue what this role does. It says product, all the things are product, and you're like, what does this role actually do? So when you can't even make a good job description, it's hard to evaluate the culture and hard for the candidate to actually align. So you really only find this stuff out later on. And with global work, like if you're in Vancouver working for a Toronto company, like that's becoming increasingly more, same with like all over the States. So culture is really the core thing that both retains the employee and like draws the employee, but there's no real matching system or anything like that. So really the interviews are the only way that we're figuring this stuff out. But over time, you are kind of learning who you are and what you want, and I think that's kind of one of the benefits of changing jobs. Not like every 3 months, and I think there is a certain ability to tell your own story that is
Mhm.
critical. Like, why did you change roles? What did you learn? And like what like so if you can't tell the story, that's also a bit of a red flag, I think, for recruiters. But if you're like, oh, this is exactly how my career went and why I made those decisions, or impacted by layoffs or other things like that, then it's a little bit easier to kind of explain yourself.
Yeah, that's true. Also, you mentioned on evaluating the company. I do remember one story where I asked the potential employer. I asked like, what, like, is this role in a new role? Is this role being like to replace somebody else? Like some other person that move on to a different role, and they said they move on to a different role. And then I ask a follow up. Like those conversation needs to happen. Like I ask a follow up. Did the person move to a different role at the same company or to a different company? They moved to a different company. Okay, that's fine. And they actually mentioned the company, which as a as an as a person who also recruits and as a person who also hires, I would not do it, because it reveals personal information. However, they did, which means I already had another information. I looked for the person on LinkedIn, went to the person, and I asked directly to that person, if you were to grab this role again, what would be something that you would change? What would be something that you would do again? What gave me an insight of a generic question. That person was open to talk with me, which was great, and what gave me the insight of an internal company culture that I didn't want to be part of as well. So it what ended up happening is that we didn't like continue the conversation, and it's like they move on to move to a different candidate and move on to a different company, like to continue my hiring process at a different company as well.
Yeah, I think that it is critical nowadays. Like you're doing 4 rounds, 5 rounds with companies. Like if you get to round two or three, I've stepped out of two processes this year alone where I got enough red flags and I was like, this is not for me. I'm stepping out.
Mhm.
And you have to focus your energy elsewhere because you're doing 5 rounds. It can actually like be very, and I'm finding that like also company cultures are not static as well. So even if you interview last year for a company, if that company has doubled in size or halved in size or something like that, it can be radically different. And I feel like the current market with the IRR focus has changed things a lot at certain companies that are more volatile, more cash flow negative, and that is really changing company culture. So I think you
Mhm.
have to kind of get a pulse today of where the company's at.
Totally.
And I guess like, what are some of the questions that you ask in the interviews, and what interviews do you think are like the best ones to kind of start like getting this pulse check?
So a few things. So if I'm like let's pretend right now I'm interviewing with the peers at the moment right now. So the peers would be like, for a product manager would be engineering manager or product design, and I'm interviewing with them. I would ask career questions. I would ask like career questions as like, um, where like where were you before like this role? Did you come new to the company? Where were you before to this role? Then to the engineering manager, I would ask, what is the culture that you're striving for? And instead of what explain to me what the culture is, I definitely ask, what is the culture that you're striving for, to the engineering managers. Because if they're a people manager, they will give me an insight on the rest of the people management side of things. So they if they cannot answer that question, people management is not thinking of the ideal culture, which means that, like, every company, as you mentioned, cultures evolve, cultures changes. A culture that was, when they were starting up, was like, let's build something, test it, evaluate, iterate, build, test, evaluate, iterate. It doesn't matter what, but we build, test, evaluate, iterate. And when the company is a bit more mature, then a new values comes in, and then the company is a bit more mature, then up top to bottom communication comes in. Like, for example, strategy. What are the strategy that we're striving for the next year? How are we going to get to the vision of 5 years? Like, if those things, if they're not thinking about the next culture, they're not thinking about growing as a company. And I'm not saying hiring more, I'm saying growing as a company, maturing as a company. So those are things that I would ask an engineering manager if I'm with the peers. With the if I'm evaluating a product role, and I'm talking to the CPO, I'm talking product strategy. I'm talking, what are your pet peeves with the product? Like, those things that you wish the team would change, but they're not changing. What, and then depends on, like, it depends on whether I have an NDA or not. I've signed NDAs with companies that I go and ask, hey, can I sign an NDA with you to ask questions about statistics, ask questions about, like, your monthly active users, about ask questions that are not, if they're a private company. If they're a public company, those all that information is made publicly available by the company. So I can do my own research. Like, even revenue, I can do my own research. On private company, that I cannot do my own research, I sign an NDA. I go in and ask, what is the, where do you see the profits coming in for the next 5 years? Like, are we evaluating growth over profits? Are we evaluating hiring over getting, like, are we reinvesting into the pipeline, into the product development pipeline, instead of looking for that cash flow positive? So those questions are, I'm asking those questions as well. If I have an NDA, if I don't have an NDA, I will ask it anyways, but I bet I'm not going to get an answer to it. It's private information and should not be disclosed to a candidate. So yeah, that's pretty much the things that I would ask some when evaluating an employer.
Yeah, I think that I usually do progressively more research the deeper I get into the rounds, and
Mhm.
ask questions related to the peer that is interviewing me. And usually the recruiter screens are fairly light, softball questions about like cash flow positive versus VC
Oh yeah.
backed and how they're funded and that kind of stuff. But then I personally have never got to the NDA stage deep statistics. I think that's a really great idea. And I think that in the future, if it's a private company, before you sign an offer, that's actually a great step, is actually flipping the script after the offer's on your plate. It's like, okay, these are all the 10 questions that will help alleviate my concerns, because at that point they've picked you. Now it's up to you to pick them. And I found that usually companies can hold it together during the interview stage. It's like between offer and start date, I often find like they're less organized. And that's often where I've always had my concerns, because it's like, okay, you were all buttoned up for the 4 interviews, and now suddenly you can't figure out how to get my information or like close it, and you're like, and then I'm like, okay, this is like, you're starting to see behind the scenes a little bit, and that's where I think ideally you have that kind of flip the script interview, and you ask them all the NDA questions that you mentioned there.
That's totally true. That's totally true. Also, one that I do think of is what are going to be my responsibilities. I'm going to be talking from the product manager angle, because that's the one that I know. Product management is very broad, so it's a very broad thing. Like I work as a product manager in backend services, so I work a lot with databases, APIs, and everything in between. Then I and so I ask what is going to be the angle. Like, it's going to be closer to product marketing on the launch phase? Is it going to be early ideation? Is it going to be identity, product management for identity? Is it going to be product management for connecting external APIs or connecting internal APIs? Like, what is like product management is too broad to say. A red flag that has come up with me, it's when a company says, we don't really know right now, we're evaluating you as a candidate, and then we're gonna think like then we're gonna see where you fit with the teams. And I'm like, either one thing that tells me that answer, that told me that answer, because this actually happened, one thing that told me behind that answer is, one, either they're hiring to fulfill headcount, or two, they have many positions available that they don't know, like they want to evaluate myself as a where would I fit as my traits. Product managers, we tend to align pretty well to one trade more than the other. Like, for example, for me, is my jam is databases, APIs, and how data flows throughout our systems, and how that data correlates to what the customer is doing at the front end. That is something that I've been specializing little by little, and it doesn't mean that I would continue doing so. Then there's the other product manager that aligns pretty well on identity. How do we understand like what this person can do across our platform, and what the person cannot do across our platform? So those things, like on that company, that actually raised a big red flag for myself, because they were over hiring, and actually shown at the latest, like that was one of the companies who did layoffs early on the tech layoffs that happened recently. That was one of the companies that did layoffs early, and I bet I would have been on those layoffs if I would continue with that hiring process.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, and I feel like when capital was cheap, people were raising lots of money, and targets were more aligned to headcount than objectives and results. And I think
Exactly.
now we're seeing a lot more common sense, kind of with kind of cash and profit being taken into account. Yeah, and I think that's where people really should be guiding these discussions. Like, okay, what's your runway? Like, if you don't know their runway, and you, like I joined a company at one point in my career which had 6 months of runway, and I didn't know that, and I had gone into it hoping for a contractual agreement, a fractional agreement, and they were like, no, we need to grow fast, we need to like bring you on full time. So I went all in without knowing what cards they had, and that was like not a smart decision. So I think that like 10 years into my career, I've known to do exactly a bit more of what you were saying. I haven't gone to the NDA extent, but that's a really smart move before you sign the offer, of really getting all the cards on the table and saying how many months of runway do you have. And like recent companies, I have asked that question. They've been very transparent. And of course, you think, oh, there's always capital coming. Like this was like a year and a half, 2 years ago. You always know, oh, there's more capital coming. Now you don't. You don't know if there's going to be more capital coming in 6 months. So it's like a totally different world out there.
Totally. I do. You just reminded me of a contract that I accepted. Actually, I accepted a contract as temporary product manager for a blockchain company. They actually mentioned like that when we were like signing the contract, we actually scrutinized a lot of the scope of work and said like and prioritize certain things as based in milestones for a contract specific. And it was based on out of discovery first. Like we needed, like the company was reinventing themselves out of identity and into a new way to understand like and try to catch the bad persons in blockchain, the persons that were only like the type of coins that were only there to scam people. They were trying to identify all those. So that was a smart like idea to reinvent the company themselves. So I went in and the person actually mentioned, like the chief mentioned, hey, you know what, we definitely need to scope this out. Instead of doing a big contract that will take up to 6 months to a year, let's do it on a milestone base. The reason why I'm asking you this is because like we're down to the last cash. And so there, like that transparency helps me, and I still did the contract because I was way too excited. Plus, learning about how proof of stake, like proof like there's a lot into blockchain and new lingo that is there, and also that was at the point where like the blockchain NFTs were up in the game, and all of a sudden they went crashing down. So I was like, what is this? Like, as a product manager, I cannot put a blind eye to a technology that I say it's not ready yet for mainstream. I don't even understand the problems that they're solving that cannot like Web 2 can solve. Like I don't even understand why would somebody need Web 3 when Web 2 can do it as well. But I need to learn it because it might be the future. So I started learning with that contract. What ended up happening, the company like run out and they're not longer there. We ended up in great terms, and it was a great contract. I guess actually it was a great contract that I would do again. So it's part of like the transparency helps you evaluate. It doesn't mean that if like they're down to the last cash, it doesn't mean that you cannot go to the company and help them. Like that's another thing as well.
I think one of the things you mentioned, like product and the product specific challenges, and one thing I've always done is evaluate the cash flow and other things like runway and whatnot. But I've never done a great job of figuring out the product place in the org and how that actually works. And this is something that I think I need to work on better is like if sales is going directly to engineering with a request and it's getting built and there's a product team in the middle, that's a problem. Like that's not going to be easy to resolve. And how does the roadmap actually get developed? Is it through customer discovery or is it through a CEO or someone directly dictating what's going to be built? Those like how product fits into the ecosystem is something that I think like it does matter to me because I want to improve my product craft. But if you're just doing an order list of things, you're basically a project manager. And so I think that's something that I need to get better at is like evaluating product roles and being like, is this truly a product role? Does your organization actually empower this team to deliver? Or is it a product owner or project manager type role where it's a long delivery list and largely prioritized by someone else? There's no strategy involved and just go do it. So that's something that like I think I need to figure out when I evaluate a workplace as well.
Yeah. It also can be like top, like the interesting one is where like top to bottom, the communication strategy comes down. Like that is a requirement. That needs to come from like in 5-year vision, the strategy and how we're going to get there to that vision Like what is the expectancy of the expected from the teams in the next year. So that will might dictate certain projects that makes a lot of sense. That and the other one would be the bottoms up. What projects can we propose that aligns to that strategy, that aligns to that vision, that would be either quick wins or would be something that we will need to justify a bit more to propose to senior leadership, that they can say, yeah, this is a good thing. That is a two-way communication that I can tell you from the product management perspective. I'm talking like we went a different sideways on the conversation side, that those are two ways conversation that fills a roadmap. And also there is the other conversation where like that one of them is proposing something that does not make sense to the other. For example, like the team is proposing a project that doesn't really aligns with the strategy, and it's more like of a nice to have. That the senior leadership would definitely has vetting vetting ownership, because they're accountable at the end of the day for the rest of the people who works at the company, that they need to say no, that's actually is a project that you should definitely not work on, and give the reasons to. That doesn't have to be just a hard no. So that, and the other one is like, how is this strategy not aligned to the vision? Can you tell me more? Like, how is this project not aligned to the strategy? Can you tell me more? So those are hard conversations to have once you're in the role as well. If those does not align, like for a product manager, if those does not align at all, and you're getting more tops to bottom approach, and you're like, yes, I can work on that project. Yes, I can work on that project. This there's time to evaluate certain things that might need you to reconsider your product management role as well.
Definitely. And I think that one of the things around evaluating role that's different now versus maybe 10 years ago is companies can push out amazing amounts of content, and sometimes it doesn't align with what they say. It's very easy, like you're here as Luis, not representing a company, and you can say what you want. But sometimes people get on there representing companies and they say things, and then you look at their website and it's like that's not what they're saying they're doing. And it's almost so easy to produce content that it's easy to catch a company and be like, oh, that doesn't align with what they actually say they're going to. And you can do this kind of research fairly easily on social media. Companies push a lot through LinkedIn and their website, and sometimes it's like a bit of smoke and mirrors. And so that and Glassdoor and other things, there's a lot of content out there. And, there are disgruntled employees that write bad reviews, and you have to take, okay, if there's one or two of them, okay. If there's a whole bunch, then you got to take that into account. I think there's so much out there that we can kind of ingest while we're in this process and say, okay, do these things align? Are there red flags here?
Totally. And speaking of red flags, let's talk about something. Let's talk about like when you say when is the right time to say like I'm not going to continue with the interview. So like that's a really good one, because I think if you do it like if there's many red flags, like the wrong thing to do is to just disappear as a candidate. I would tell you that like it's similar to ghosting that companies do, because they have many candidates, so they have move on to the next one, and like you're like, hey, what happened? Like I thought we were in good terms, but I never heard back from you. That's a similar one that a candidate can do that might hurt the reputation, which is just ghosting the company. A good way that I've handled that, like for example, I was interviewing for a company where like there were many red flags, and then they wanted to schedule another interview. At that point, I said, hey, you know what? I think, I just sent a quick message. That was the hiring manager directly. It wasn't the recruiter. So I said, hey, I do thank you for your time. I think as I evaluate like um, other other priorities, other opportunities are being like have me other opportunities are more have jumped more to like to the opportunity, just to say my English is mixing with my Spanish right now in my head. So when that happened, is just say, hey, send a quick note. Send a quick note that says, thank you for the opportunity. I'm gonna move on. As similar to how the employer does it. Like similar how the employer, like a really good employer, that sends a note that says, hey, thanks. We're actually moving on with a different candidate. Thank you for your time and everything. And that that closes the loop. The other one is once you get the job offer, and once I get the job offer and I have seen things that I don't like, and we're starting to negotiate the job offer. I think the negotiation piece of the job offer is a really key piece of the interview, of like flipping the switch on the interview. I am interviewing the company as I negotiate a job offer. The worst thing that you can, and this is like many on social media says, the worst thing that you can do is not negotiate. That's actually true. Negotiating the job offer is actually interviewing backwards. And the reason why is because now you're looking at how the company aligns. It doesn't, negotiation doesn't have to be only for the base salary. It can be for many other things. Like for example, hey, like I noticed that it's required to work from the office 5 days a week. Can I do only three? Like, would that be okay with you? And that, if they're like, if the negotiation, if one thing that happened with me was I was interviewing for a company. I try negotiate, like this is a normal thing. I negotiated. I didn't try to negotiate. I actually was negotiating. And almost immediately, 30 minutes later, I said, I got a message from the hiring manager saying, this is so disappointing. Like that starting off the word, like that was a long email that I actually never read. Like I think I read the first two, but starting with a this is so disappointing, that definitely sends me an immediate, like a big red flag of saying, what happened here? Like, is this gonna be the person that is gonna be managing me, and use big words for a candidate? That's definitely not the best way to do it. I'm glad that this is over. So, like when you get the job offer, negotiate. Negotiating is flipping the switch, and there's many. I'm not gonna say how to negotiate. There's many resources available on how to negotiate a job offer. You can go to ChatGPT and ask them, what can I like? I'm hiring for a position X, and you are a candidate with this amount of years, and the prompt can be somewhere around there. Like I know you did, like the previous to this one, you did something around ChatGPT for recruiting and how to get your competitive edge as a candidate. That's one thing that I would say. Like, what can I negotiate on a position like this? And then I send the offer, and ChatGPT will give me an answer. ChatGPT will tell me what can I negotiate. Sometimes it's commuting. Sometimes it's remote hybrid work. I don't know. Sometimes it might be that you are required to be on call on a Sunday. That's going to be a hard no for me. And I think that's a deal breaker. Pretty much it. And I've had certain things that only come up at the job offer that you have to definitely read the job offer and the contract before signing.
Yeah, and I think that one of the pieces of advice I'd have for any listeners is, even if it's too good to be true, negotiate. And just because it will show the other party's cards. And I've made this mistake before where I'm like, it's above my targets, everything looks amazing, contract looks clean. When you just say yes, you don't understand anything about the other side. And usually you find that stuff out after. And so if you at least poke in a few different areas, you can see how things are. And if something is too good to be true, it probably is. And maybe you ask some questions about, okay, how are you, like maybe 300K for some Fortune 500, you ask around, you're like, oh, they easily make that because the revenue you bring to the company bounces. Like, I think understanding how you get paid is also like a kind of like how you make money for the company is something that I've never really done, something I probably should do. Like if it's some massive capex project that's going to pay itself off way in the future, then it's like, okay, if they can explain that to you, they should be able to explain that to you. If they don't understand how they're going to pay for you, that's also a red flag. Like they may be paying you market rate, but it's like they're like, oh, we don't know how this is all going to work out. That person just has to pay for themselves, and so. And then I think there's a question from Brent talking kind of about culture and this and that, and he asked about like the CRO's view on culture, and I think that in a C-suite role, there should be a focus on culture and cultural development. Unfortunately, I don't find a lot of executives are fully trained when they make these jumps. So sometimes they really don't fully embody where they want to take the company. And I think that's kind of like, it used to be good enough to just do your job and do it well. Now that's not the case. Like now culture actually plays a much bigger role in the workplace when there's people have a lot of different options. And kind of one piece that I want a personal anecdote from kind of your comments there is like writing that no to a company is really hard. Like we're not here to say that it's easy to turn down role. Like especially when you don't have a job, saying like I'm not going to continue to round 3 or round 4 and I'm done. It's like it's really weird. But like you have to open up your time and energy for other opportunities that you feel like are best suited for yourself. And I was reading the other day that some of these long interview processes actually are partially there to make a candidate feel like they can't negotiate at the end. Because by the time you get to the end, you're like, do I really want to like say no to something that I just sunk 40 hours into, like preparing and interviewing and all that kind of stuff? And so the company is a huge advantage at the end, which is why you need to start doing some of these things early, and you need to actually exit the process when you feel like it's not for you. So don't wait for until the end, although you definitely should be doing the NDA type thing that Luis mentioned, but keep it rolling throughout the process.
Yeah, that's correct. That's definitely correct.
Yeah, and do you have any other like stories, anecdotes, Luis, to kind of wrap us up here as we're finishing about kind of what advice you have for people that are going through this process right now?
I could resume a story. It's a long-winded story. I definitely would try to resume it as we wrap it up. So on the other side of the table, I hired the wrong candidate, and it still haunts me to the day. Like it was like a long steps of errors in that hiring process, starting from the job description writing for the candidate that I was looking for. At that time, I was hiring for developers, and I was actually hiring to build the first developers out of the developer house that the company uses. So I was hiring for the in-house developers, and by no means one thing I should have done is I should have consulted with an engineering manager or an experienced person hiring developers before I went into this, because I started consulting with the consulting house that they had for development, and that came out to be like the wrong thing. The second one was the job description was long, was winded, was definitely not the right job description, and it was too generic to what the company needed, to what I needed to build a team. Then it went into the hiring process. I ignored a few flags. I didn't involve other technical developers to actually do the interview. I actually involved other different roles like customer service. I involved 2 more developers that were too junior to actually evaluate a senior developer. What ended up happening is that I hired a candidate who wasn't senior enough for what I needed as the first developer coming in, and they needed guidance. I didn't have the guidance for them, and in the company there was no guidance for that candidate. That was painful, and I think that's one of my my key takeaways from the other side is like we're the employer is also, most of employers and a small company, as a small startup, they're still trying to figure it out. I did learn my lesson, and I think this is part of my growing career as well. This was early in my career. I think I'm talking about 6 years or 8 years ago. Saying early in my career, so it was it was too soon to forget. It has shaped how I hire people as well. Now I go into companies. I go into companies and do the same thing again. I go into companies like for blockchain, for example. I go into companies as a contractor, but then I leave hiring a really good PM for them, and a really like and getting the first design team put together, and then I move out. I have realized that I'm not good at at hiring developers. I've hired amazing developers, by the way. I've hired amazing developers, but that first one actually left a scar. That that won't definitely, like, it won't go away. So small companies are they're still trying to figure it out. Be patient with them as well, and make sure to do your due diligence when you're evaluating an employer as well.
Yeah, I think what I took out of that is that, like, you have to also have empathy for the other side throughout this whole
Mhm.
process. When you're asking these questions, it can be challenging for the other party to kind of answer these things. So give them a bit of time too. And not everyone is perfect. So maybe if you see a red flag, email them and say, hey, I just want to clarify this before kind of coming to. If you see multiple red flags, then you can make your decision. But hopefully everyone that listened in got something out of this episode. And I did share Lewis's QR code there a second ago, so you can find him on LinkedIn if you want any information. This is a link to my ADP list if anyone's listening and wants to learn more about kind of how I help people, mentor people. I'm offering short free sessions once a week on ADP list. And if you did love the show, I'm testing out this Buy Me a Coffee app just to see if I can kind of pay for running the service and all that kind of stuff, all the back end system stuff. So yeah, hopefully everyone enjoyed the show. And the next one coming up, we'll actually have two guests on the show. We're talking to a recruiting company solo guy and another person that works for a recruiting company that has an in-house perspective. So we'll be kind of flipping the script and kind of bridging off what Luis mentioned there about being on the hiring side. And we'll be talking kind of to those folks about what advice they have for candidates looking for a role. So with that, thanks everyone.